Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Gregory, and this is Accounting 667 Advanced Audit. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about effective interviewing and interrogations. That's in Chapter 10 of our reading. Now, I want to start out with a caveat on this. Depending on the situation and the type of interview or interrogation you are performing, either audit regular audit, forensic examination, or a fraud examination, you may want law enforcement presence with you, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So consider the environment and the type of work you're performing. In most cases, routine audits and some forensic audits, interviews are part of the process and really are fairly benign to the auditor. We sit down with management, we do some inquiring, we may talk to other employees such as key members of staff, maybe supervisors, and we talk to them about their auditing procedures and processes, usually very benign. But fraud examiners or forensic examiners that are working in somewhat volatile situations may find themselves in less secure locations, and they may be working with a hostile witness or target. They may be working on a sensitive case. They may be partnering with federal agencies, or for example. So consider the environment in which you are going to be conducting these interviews and or interrogations. Now, the difference between an interview and an interrogation is that an interview is information gathering. We're trying to find out about how processes are performed. We sit down and we go over observation of inventory and talk to staff about how they perform their inventory process. They're basically, like I said, information gathering, but they may lead, if it works that way, to an interrogation. And we find that interrogations, just the nature of them, can be adversarial in nature. You are trying to find something out, and someone may be trying not to tell you. They take much more planning than the inquiries during an audit process. And you're most likely going to look at this target circle that I've created and go from the outside in. So you may want to start talking to people who have a basic level of knowledge to gather understandings. Then you go to somebody who has much more developed knowledge. They may have worked with the subject. They may have a deeper relationship with them, and they may know the circumstances better. And then you move in towards the center, which is the targeted subject and or suspect. Now, when you're building the case, this is figure 10-1 in your text. We start off with the first part of document analysis. We want to understand the industry and the environment. We want to find out the basis of the understanding of what the issue is, and then gathering the evidence and documentation to help us to prepare for the interviews. Then we step into the circle and we start looking at these neutral third party. These are people who are not subject to the allegations, but they have information. They have knowledge about how the operation of a company works or how the duties are. So we want to gather interviews on them as part of confirming the document analysis that we performed. Then we want to move in a little bit closer, and we want to start talking to corroborative witnesses. These are people with more knowledge of the circumstance. They may be used to confirm or refute the evidence that we've gathered to date. They may have more of a relationship with the target and can probably provide maybe not only work insight, but maybe personal insights. We move from the corroborating witness to the co-conspirators. And co-conspirators are those people that have been identified as may have been partly involved in the allegation. They could be involved directly by assisting the target. They could provide indirect level of involvement. Maybe they just provided some information to people who passed it on. And they may have been coerced. Maybe there was some pressure from management above for that employee to do something. And now because they took part in the action, they are considered at this point in time a co-conspirator until we can prove that the coercion took place. And then finally, you have the target. They start out as a suspect, but then if the allegations start to come to fruition, they may become the subject or the target of the investigation. Very important, regardless of what stage we are in the process, that you do very careful preparation and planning. And what you want to do is start the preparation and planning around questions and evidence that develop the who, what, where, how, and why of the allegation. Who did it? What was done? Where was it done? How was it done? And perhaps some insight as to the why it was done. So as you gather evidence, you have to start thinking like that fraudster. What could be the rationale, motivation, pressure, or opportunity that that individual had? Was it greed? Was it an ideology? Was there coercion involved? Was there ego that caused this allegation to occur? And part of your preparation and planning is to determine the location and venue and who should be present. If you are working with prosecutors or if you're working with agencies, you will seek out the advice of the agency, the individual or company you were working with, as to location and venue. Then we want to conduct the interview. We first want to start off with building rapport. And we want to remember, we want to keep the questions short, but we want them to build on the case. So you might ask some small, short questions at first, just one to get everybody relaxed, build that rapport, and then start building the background that leads us to the allegation. Regardless if you're working with the neutral third parties or co-conspirators or even the target, keep them on target of the topic and keep them focused. Sometimes, whether consciously or unconsciously, they may divert off the topic and start talking about something else or bring other immaterial information in. You want to keep that person focused. You also want to do repetitive confirmation of your understanding. So as someone is responding to you, confirm back to them your understanding. The last thing you want is to misunderstand what the interviewee is saying to you, and it may take you down a wrong trail. And then finally, you need to keep control of the interview. And this is where sometimes law enforcement presence can be a benefit to help maintain stability. You don't want the interview to get out of hand. You don't want the interviewee to start asking questions and trying to take over the interview. We have 3 basic stages of interviewing: introduction, body, and close. Introduction, we want to set everyone at ease, build rapport, but we also want to set the ground rules. We want to cover exactly what we're going to talk about, who is in control of this interview, and when it can be stopped. In the body, this is where you're asking the questions. You want to start from some general ideas and start moving towards specific topics. Always making sure that wherever you start, you narrow that focus. You might use some confirming questions, such as, I want to confirm my understanding of what you said the process of something was, or I want to go into more detail on the events that took place on maybe a specific date. So you want very detailed questions. You don't want them to misinterpret what the question is. You also, during all three stages, but particularly in the body, where you're asking questions and getting responses, observe verbal and nonverbal cues. We'll go into that in a little bit later, but verbal and nonverbal cues can be some really great indications of if there is honesty appearance or there may be appearances of deception. Finally, in the last stage of the interview process, you want to summarize what you heard. Do I have an understanding of your interview correctly? Ask them, is there anything else I should know? Is there anything else you'd like to add that would be of value? Maybe, is there somebody else that I should talk to in corroborating what you're saying or gaining additional insight? And always leave the door open for a follow-up. Let them know. If you need to contact me, that's great. We can follow up with additional information, but I may need to also follow up with you. Now, the difference between the interview and the interrogation process is, again, interviews are information gathering. When we get into the interrogation process, we are looking for admission seeking. At this point in time, we've probably done enough interviews, we gathered enough evidence, and perhaps the prosecutors are ready to move forward and have an interview with the suspect. So again, in that environment, you want to try to build the rapport and the ease, set the ground rules, and also review what you have up to date. The goal is to obtain the confession or the proof of innocence and the identification of a true suspect. So in admission seeking, you are trying to get that confession. So you start to, when you're talking to them, you may start to set down some potential rationalizations for why someone might commit that allegation. And your target might admit or agree to them. So you might try to talk about issues such as, I can see why you would feel it was okay to do whatever it was. Maybe you were under pressure to ensure the performance targets were met, and the only way you could do that was to do some material misstatement of the financials. Okay, I get that. Doesn't mean you agree with it, but you get it. You're trying to soften up the interviewee for that admission seeking statement. Maybe you say, well, I understand that your partner may have recently lost their job. That's why you may have had to embezzle that money. I can understand that. Times are tough. I agree with you. Maybe you should have been promoted into that job. It sounds like you were qualified to do it. And so maybe that was why you decided to create a ghost employee so that you could get that extra money. You try to provide them anything that helps them realize the justification of the act. And if they see that you may be trying to rationalize what they're doing, they may be more comfortable in talking to you. And again, observe those verbal and nonverbal cues. Some things you want to think about or be aware of. You want to seek continuous agreement. You want to get that interrogation going down the pipeline So you want them to be continually saying yes to you, because it's the more they say yes, the more they are getting closer and closer to that admission. You cannot and do not compromise confidentiality. You don't promise it at all. Sometimes you will get an interviewee that will say, I will talk to you, but I want this confidential between the two of us. Perhaps you've gotten a whistleblower complaint and you've called them back, or you've met with them and they say, I just want this confidential. You can't promise confidentiality because of the sheer nature of the information you give them. You may be required to report it. For example, if someone was being coerced by another party to commit some misstatement in the financials, and they say it's because I'm being sexually harassed by that person, we have to stop there. That's where we really need to get those law enforcement agencies involved with this, because now it's elevated beyond just the change in the financial information. You always want to tell the interviewee that you appreciate what they're telling you, but there may be other agencies, attorneys that will have a need to know this information, and I must reveal it. Be careful negotiating. Sometimes you can get caught up in becoming a negotiator. You give me this, I'll give you that. The question you have to ask yourself is, do you have the level of authority to negotiate for information? If you make sure I don't get tied to this fraud, I'll tell you everything. You can't negotiate that. You need to work with who you are working with, such as your federal agency, your U.S. attorneys, or any other law enforcement agencies or attorneys, and find out who has that authority. Now, you can tell the person during the interview, hey, I can't negotiate for you, but I can pass this information along, and they will be informed of your cooperation in this matter. That's all you can say. Finally, don't tell the interviewee there is an allegation. All you're trying to do is get some information on something. That's all you are. I'm just looking to gather information on how the accounts payable process operates. Why? Has something gone on? Did somebody steal from us? You can't reveal if there's an allegation or not. That's not your role. Also, don't tell the interviewee during the interview where the source of the information is coming from. You can say, I have it from a reliable witness or a reliable person that the process is A, B, C, and D. Can you confirm that? Because you don't want to put a risk on those neutral third party and corroborating witnesses. If they back out on you, you might not have a case to stand on. Again, the types of interviews and interrogation questions. We have introductory. What is your name? What is the position you have? What are your daily roles and responsibilities? Then the informational gathering. That's the body of your interview. Finally, the closing, the summarization, and opening it up for potential follow-up. You also have assessment types of questions. We don't get into them very often, but if you are interviewing a number of people and you find out that based on the totality of the questions and answers, because you're probably going to ask similar questions of these people, that some of those past answers have been inconsistent with others, say 4 out of 5 interviewees all say basically the same thing, but one is going off in a different direction, you might want to have a second interview with that person to do some credibility on those inconsistencies. And you can assess them by saying, look, I've talked to 3 other people and they state that the process is A, B, C, and D. but when I talked to you, your process was A, D, E, and F. Can you explain to me or clarify for me why your process is different than the others? And then finally, the admission seeking. You want to clear the innocent and you want to encourage the subject to confess. That's your goal. Clear, confess. And on pages 792 to 808 of your text, there's detailed examples of each. There's lots of different types of questions you can be asking. Now we have three types of questions that we can ask, or classifications of questions. And I'll cover two in detail, but we'll cover all three in the next slide. So we have open-ended questions. Open-ended questions do not allow for a yes or no response. Okay. So you want those in your interview, in the body of your interview. For example, what or how does the company do X? Or what is the role of the petty cash employee when it comes to reconciling the monthly bank statement? Something like that. You might ask, why do you think that a certain employee's absence was concerning to you? Maybe somebody was absent on days where there were large cash shortages in the cash counts. So, I see Tracy, and Tracy's often gone the day we do cash counts. And it seems like Tracy's cash is always short by something. Well, why do you think that employee's absence was concerning to you? Well, it seems to be a pattern. Maybe the next day when Tracy comes back to work, Tracy is not feeling very well. And that could be a concern. You might ask questions such as, what other issues or concerns do you have that you would like to share? Is there somebody else you would like me to talk to, and why? You mentioned Shirley. Why? What might I get as information from Shirley if I were to reach out to her? On the opposite end, you have closed questions. Only yes, no answers. But the yes, no answer may lead to open-ended follow-up questions. For example, did you sign the purchase order for those items? There's only two answers, yes or no. They said yes, they may say, why do you think those items were important to the company? There's your open-ended question that follows your closed question. And here are a couple more examples. Does your supervisor review and confirm the bank reconciliations monthly? Did you notice a change of behavior, attitude, lifestyle of an employee? Yes, I did. Can you expand on that? Can you tell me what kinds of behaviors you saw, or attitudes or lifestyles? Now, of the two, there's one more, and it's what we call leading questions. And normally leading questions are starting to focus down more into the topic that we are trying to get to. So it doesn't leave a lot of opportunity for the interviewee to maneuver the to maneuver the answer. So you might ask a question such as, there's been no other contracts other than this contract we're talking about, correct? So you're leading them down to an answer. Another one might be, you did not see any other behavior of this employee outside of flashy clothes that you mentioned. It might force them to say something else, such as, well, I also saw that that individual was wearing a particularly pricey piece of jewelry. Okay, let's talk some more about that. So you're leading them down a path with those questions. Joseph Wells, who founded the ACFE many years ago, has this top 10 commandments for effective interviews. And it's in the text, but I want to share it with you. 1, you got to prepare. You do not want the interviewee to get the upper hand of the situation. Think as you go. Follow-up questions, confirmations, reiterating what has been said, summarize what's been said. Look for those verbal and nonverbal cues, and we'll get to that. Set the tone. You are the professional, and all you are is trying to seek the truth. You're not going to arrest anybody. You have no power to arrest anybody. All you want to know is what's going on. As simple as it might be, or as messy as it might be. Set the pace. Start with some easy, I call them softballs. And then circle more to more specific questions. An example was, I worked on a case where a member of a school district who worked in the maintenance department was passed over for a raise. And because that individual felt they deserved the raise, they decided that they were going to steal some things from the school. Well, what we found is they were stealing building materials and supplies that should have been going to an addition to the school to their home. And so we start off with some easy questions such as, I understand you've been a maintenance worker here for so many years and you recently wanted to get promoted, but it didn't seem like, you didn't get it. That can be really buggy, can't it? Well, yeah, it can. It's frustrating because, I really needed the money. It's like, oh, yeah. Well, we drove past your place the other day and saw that you were doing some really nice renovation on your home. Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a beautiful time to be renovating. It's springtime. The weather's perfect. You're able to get a lot of stuff done. And so you build that rapport and that ease. One way we knew that that person had stolen those items was, 1, most of the wood was labeled for the school district. And 2, they had a particular color of rhododendron out in their yard. And a rhododendron is a beautiful flowering bush that is in the Pacific Northwest. Well, this was a very exceptional color. I hadn't seen it before, but I know where I had seen it before. It was part of the order for the school district grounds. So I said, well, your spouse was a he, and I said, your wife must just really love those new bushes in the yard. My God, they are the most gorgeous color I've ever seen. I've never seen those. Can you share with me the name of them? Oh, yeah, it's called blah, blah, blah. Great. Man, I live, 30 miles outside the city, but I'd sure like to get those in my yard. I have purple ones and I have white ones and I have peach ones, but I don't have that pink one, and I really need it. And then you build up that rapport with them on that question, and then that's when you start going to more specific questions. So did you notice that the bushes you have in your yard are the exact same bushes that are in the inventory for the school district renovation? Open, closed question. They have to answer yes or no. Well, if he's in charge of maintenance, he would know. So most likely goes, yeah, I saw that. Great. Why do you have the same species and color? So you start narrowing that down. The next thing you want to do is let them talk. Be patient. You may see some nonverbal cues that you're going to be alert on. You might want to take a few notes on. Be straightforward and transparent. Just ask the questions. You're not trying to trick the person into anything. You are just trying to seek the truth. So be transparent with that. Don't try to be edgy or try to ask questions that really have double entendres behind them. Joseph Wells brings this up again. Patience. It cannot be stressed enough. This isn't speed dating. You're not trying to ask as many questions as you can in a short period of time. You want to ask the questions that elicit the answer. So you may have to wait for the fraudster, perhaps the subject, if you are that narrow in your interviewing, to see if they can come up with a way to create some form of deception. Let them sweat it out. Circle back. Always circle back. Double check. I see that you say XYZ, but 15 minutes ago when I asked you a similar question, you answered it a different way. Summarize, reconfirm, always go back. Sometimes they will try to trick you. Amazing. Finally, document. Get it in writing. Have the interviewee document what they said. Have them write it down. It's especially important during admission seeking. You don't want them to say, well, you wrote it and I didn't. Make them write it. Looking for that admission confession in interrogations. This is a suggested way from the text. I'm not sure I agree with all of the pieces, but again, I usually do this in the presence of law enforcement. So it may be a time where the law enforcement person or the prosecutor steps in and does some of this where I don't do it. Perhaps the prosecutor sits down and does the first thing. They accuse him. I want to see what the shock value is. So I'm going to sit down and in 20 minutes, I'm probably going to charge you with fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud. What's their reaction? You want to see what the shock of the reaction is and observe that reaction. This is where I come in my role is the questions are being asked by one person. I may ask a follow-up question if I can. Otherwise, I am looking at the verbal and nonverbal cues. Is it silence? Innocent people usually don't sit there silent. They usually will strongly deny it. Is it a mumbled response? Is it outrage? What is the reaction? Now, the text offers the suggestion to repeat the accusation. Same words, same degree. Maybe you're trying to elicit a different reaction. Sometimes the interviewee will try to interrupt you. You're in the middle of trying to explain to this individual how you arrived at that, at him or her as the eventual target, and they start interrupting you or denying. Don't let them waste your time. If they try to deflect, bring it back around. Again, circle back around. If they try to deflect off something else, bring them back. Don't let them change tactics because they're going to try everything in the book they can. You might delay their response. Look, I know you want to tell me your explanation, but hear me out. I want you to understand the depth and breadth of information I have. Then we can address this. If they try to start taking over and interrupting, this is where you go back and you set the tone. Look, this is my interview of you. I will stop this interview, but it may not stop me from arresting you. You might play good cop, bad cop, even though you're both not cops. One may use the pointed deflections or interruptions when the interviewee is trying to deflect. The other person, if there's another person there, they may try to diffuse the alibis by using reasoning. In the case of the Bushes, the person said, I don't remember where I bought them from. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about that. He says, I didn't buy them. I said, okay, you didn't buy them. Then how did they come upon your property? Who bought them for you? So you're trying to get rid of the alibi. I didn't do it. I wasn't at the store. Where did you find that particular brand of bush? How did it get to your property? I mean, it didn't walk itself. So you try to do reasoning by diffuse those alibis. Now, hopefully, one or all of these tactics will result in a confession. Again, get it in writing. Starting on page 820, there is a list of suggestions, and some of them are really, really good suggestions to make sure that they include, such as dates, times, people, locations. Get that minute detail in there as much as you can in the written confession. Now, when you're judging deception, that's very difficult because they're fraudsters. They're liars. Some of them are real professional at this. So what I've done is I posted the ACFE website for self-study and training events where there are training opportunities to look and learn how deception happens. And these are by professionals, usually retired law enforcement officers who have walked these paths and can give you some really interesting insight. Now we're going to talk a little bit about verbal and nonverbal cues. It's very important to pay attention to what's going on around you. Are you getting vague answers or insignificant off-topic responses, or maybe selected memory? You could talk about, what are some of the, as you're building rapport, some favorite places that that the interviewer likes to go eat at. Well, I like to go eat at Applebee's. Oh, yeah, Applebee's. When was the last time you were there? Oh, about 3 weeks ago. Oh, anything good on the menu? I haven't been there in a while. So you try to get that. And then when they come up with selective memory, because you ask them a question, well, 2 weeks ago on this date, you went to the bank and withdrew money from the company account using a check written for cash. I don't remember that. And you say, okay, so you remember what you ate 3 weeks ago at an Applebee's, but you don't remember going to the bank 2 weeks ago and withdrawing $15,000. Interesting. So you start building, looking for those verbal cues that you can come back and reconfirm, deflect the alibi. Sometimes there'll be just silence. This is where sometimes you get a little antsy, but you have to be patient. You have to let them sweat it out. You've got all day. They may not. They may avoid eye contact with you. They may have some body movement, such as crossing their arms, yawning, acting bored, sitting back in their seat. Maybe they start to shift their body into what we call a fleeing position. And a fleeing position is where you know where the door is, and you start, sometimes subconsciously, they shift their body so they're facing more towards the door, as if they're going to try to take off and run away. And hostility, snarky language, insults, changing speech patterns, answering a question with a question. Those are all kinds of ways that they're trying to deflect. They're trying to throw you off topic. Now, there's lots of resources out there on interviewing. The ACFE has websites and seminars. They have books And manuals in those books can be written by ACFE personnel, experts in the field, or even by experts in the field where we purchase them from perhaps other law enforcement agencies, people who are very knowledgeable in certain industry types of frauds. And finally, the ACFE can give you a wonderful networking with professionals through chapter meetings, webinars, seminars, the annual conference. There's also, if you go out and type interviewing techniques on youtube.com, maybe interviewing techniques in fraud or in investigations, you'll get tons of videos. Scroll through some of them and see what tips and techniques they can give you. And finally, reach out to your local law enforcement, especially if you're interested in a career in this type of work. Reach out to law enforcement agencies. Your local agency, maybe the office of the federal agency, the local federal agency, prosecuting attorneys. Interview them. Talk to them about how they go about doing this. It gives you wonderful insight. If you have any questions, remember, post to the class questions for the good of all. Send me a Halo message or make an appointment through me with Calendly. Have a great week. Have a blessed week. And I'll see you in the classroom.